December the 1st, 2018 will see issue 17 of Outer Limits magazine published. Have you subscribed yet? If not, you'll be missing out on the following. Madam Mig passes away. MJ12 hoax? Is real evidence being hidden? Why UFOs could not be entirely explained by human technology. 2 lots of photographic evidence are examined. We revisit a classic UFO encounter from Greece. 100 years after the armistice, we take a look at the Angel of Mons. A real-life abduction case in They Came in the Night. The Greys revealed. Peter Robbins remembers art, life and UFOs, and he thinks about Bud Hopkins. Life on Mars? The Road to Pascagoula, a research strip from 1981, which is a review of this classic abduction with new, never-before-heard information. The Kerry Island UFO from Ireland in November 2018 will bring you the latest information on the new case. Subscribe now and do not miss out. £9 a year for UK or $12 for US plus a PayPal fee for 6 issues a year. Subscribe at the magazine website chris0597.wixsite.com/outer-limits-mag and come be informed. Outer Limits magazine are pleased to announce the date and the venue for our 2019 Outer Limits magazine conference. This will be our 3rd such event. The date, Saturday the 17th of August 2019, and the venue will be the Pontefract Town Hall's Assembly Rooms. We have seating for 250 at ground level. This is a strictly limited number, so access is on a first come, first served basis. This fantastic venue is situated close to all 3 of Pontefract's railway stations, with Monk Hill being the closest, literally a 10-minute walk away from the venue. Those travelling by car parking is less than a 5-minute walk from the venue, and it's currently charged at £4.50 all day. The Pontefract bus station is less than 2 minutes away from the venue, and Saturday is also Pontefract's market day with many facilities available. There is also many sandwich shops, fish and chip shops and other types of food available, all within a 5-minute walk of the venue, and Pontefract has good access to both the M1 and the M62. It is with honour and a little bit of excitement that Outer Limits magazine can now announce the speakers for its 2019 event. To host the event, working under the banner title of The Closest of Encounters, as always shall be Outer Limits magazine editor Chris Evers. He will present a talk on a subject relevant to the theme of the conference. Making his Outer Limits magazine conference debut shall be author and experiencer Philip Kinsella, who shall discuss his own extremely close encounter event and personal experiences. Making his 3rd appearance at an Outer Limits magazine event will be Paul Sinclair, to discuss more details of his investigation and findings. Outer Limits magazine associate editor Malcolm Robinson will be returning to discuss his new publication all about the Bob Taylor close encounter, or as it's also known, the Decmont Woods incident. And it is with great honour that we announce our very special speaker making a trip to the United Kingdom from America, with what shall be his first ever visit to the UK, to present his own story in a public forum that shall be the only remaining witness to this famous Pascagoula abduction, Calvin Parker. Without a doubt, this will be a once-in-a-lifetime chance to meet and hear Calvin's most intriguing case, straight from the only surviving witness. Working alongside Outer Limits magazine is my co-host of the new Inside Outer Limits radio show, that's Philip Mantle, the publisher at Flying Disc Press, and Philip is no stranger to investigations himself. We are extremely grateful for Philip's continued support of Outer Limits magazine and our endeavours. Tickets for the day are priced at £20 each plus a £1.80 PayPal fee, and are now available to order at chris0597.wixsite.com/outer-limits-mag. And remember, we have strictly limited seating available to a maximum 250. Since the announcement that tickets were available, they have already started selling, and very quickly. So don't miss out, get your tickets straight away. And the tickets shall be posted out, so please allow at least 14 days to receive them. We'll see you there. Hello everyone, and welcome to what is the very first Inside Outer Limits show in December. So we're ready for Christmas. And of course, with me as always is my co-host, Philip Mantle. Hi Phil, how are you doing?
Good evening, Chris. I'm fine, thank you, here in sunny Pontefract.
Sunny Pontefract. It's been throwing it down all day in Hull. Absolutely awful. I bet you've had the same.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Another gentleman who can actually, and I'm using the word gentleman loosely here, of course. another gentleman who can confirm it's been throwing it down all day in Hull is our guest this evening, Mr. Mike Covell. Hi Mike, how are you doing?
Good evening, I'm alright, thanks, gent. It's a bit wet.
Yeah, a bit wet. Have you been out and about in it today, Mike?
Numerous school runs and Christmas shopping and all the rest. Yes.
Oh, right. So you all ready for Christmas?
Just about, yeah.
All right, better than me then.
I mean, this is going to be an interesting show in it tonight, gentlemen. I mean, three Yorkshire lads in one go. I mean, anybody outside of the county might be looking for their Yorkshire dialect dictionary tonight. Especially two lads from the east of the county as well, and one from the west.
Well, you blow them all, mate. That's what I say. If they can't understand us, they should come and join us. Right. Mike Covell is a noted author. In fact, he's actually released, how many books is it now, Mike? About 28?
28, yeah.
Yeah, wow. So, good heavens. You must be prolific. Do you ever see your family at all?
Yeah, I mean, my office is in my house, so...
Oh, right, okay.
We do cross paths occasionally.
Yeah. What was the first book you released, Mike?
Good question. The Marfleet Murder Mystery was the first book I released. It was a true crime book. It was self-published. And it was weird because I self-published 4 books. And this guy rang me up, and he was from a production company in LA, and he said, I've downloaded your book and I've been reading it, and I love it, and I want to make it into a movie, and have you got any more manuscripts? So I sent him a few manuscripts, and he read them, and he bought the rights to 4 books.
Excellent.
3 of them I'd not even published.
Excellent.
So I then got a publisher after that, so I did it all back to front, really. So
good heavens. So what is your latest publication, Mike?
The latest one is The Haunted Homes of Hull, which is part of the Mike Covell Investigates series. And the idea is, like, I mean, you know yourself these days with social media, someone only has to go into a house and break wind, and suddenly it's all over the newspapers that it's haunted. And what people fail to realise is that these stories have been going on for centuries. And I went right back in the archives and discovered haunted houses in Hull dating right back to the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. And so basically it's kind of a chronology of haunted houses in Hull. And I've done the full paranormal background of each one, the full historical overview of each one, and then argued whether or not, I think there's merit to the case. Obviously things like the Grey Street, I've been quite critical of that. Through the years, so there's stuff like that in it, and it's quite an open book, really.
Just before you go on there, Mike, let's just define what De Grey Street is and what it actually means, because there may be people listening, and maybe even Phil doesn't actually know what De Grey Street is.
I've never heard of it.
Let's hope it stays that way. 39 De Grey Street came on the map a week after Most Haunted Live came from Pontefract. And I was on the show, and a week afterwards I bumped into a guy in Eastall, and he said to me, can you imagine having an haunted house? It must be a right money spinner. And then a week later I bumped into him again, and he said, you'll never guess what, I've got an haunted house. And he said, there were deaths and murders and suicides. He said, people have tried to research it, and they can't, and it was a mortuary and a morgue and a funeral parlour, and it was a hostel, and 20 kids were murdered in there. And I just thought, well, wait a minute, why has this not crossed my path before? There's all these macabre stories relating to it. Why have I not seen it in my studies? And he was reluctant to give me the address, but a few weeks later, the address went up online. I went to the Hull History Centre, sat there for a full day, went right through the trade directories, the polling books, the electoral roll, and pretty much debunked all the rubbish stories that was coming out about the place. There was no deaths, there was no murders, there was no suicides. It was never a hostel. It was never a morgue. It was never a mortuary. It was never a funeral parlour. It was actually a furniture maker, which is a bit boring. The other claim is that no one would live in the house, but the electoral roll showed that people lived in there until its current owner took it over. So I pretty much debunked it all. And initially, I wrote an article for you in the Outer Limits magazine. I wrote an article for the Whole Daily Mail. I got death threats from paranormal groups saying, "How dare you?" I had psychics and mediums, giving me quite a run for my money and calling me all names and stuff like that. Because basically, I'd taken all these claims and used primary historical contemporary sources and debunked them. That ended up with an appearance on a television show called Ouija, Dicing with Death, where I went on there and talked about the history of the place. And it's just crazy, really. So the whole chapter in the book kind of looks at all these claims, and then it looks at the actual history. I mean, there was real people, real families that lived there, and with that, real stories, and we're ignoring them because some psychic is walking into a room full of dolls and picking up on ghostly children.
Well, I can actually vouch for a lot of what you've just said there, Mike, because this is actually the first time I've mentioned this to you, but various members of my family have lived right across the road from that property, and they were living there from the mid-1970s right up to the mid-1990s. And as you know yourself, Mike, I live about 500, 600 yards away from the property myself, and I had never ever heard one single claim about this property down to Grey Street in the many years that I've lived in this area.
Yeah, it just seemed to arise out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
Based on these guys, and a lot of groups have gone and been disappointed with it, but there you go. I mean, it all adds to our wonderful, colourful history of folk.
Well, it's a cash cow, isn't it, for the person who's running it, basically.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so you've also got, not only do you have an avid interest in local history, with a paranormal view, of course, looking at ghosts, etc., but you've also got an avid interest in UFOs as well, haven't you? So what some of the strange sightings have you been investigating?
Well, the first sighting I ever had was what got me into all this, was when I was an 8-year-old boy living in East Hull, and I saw what could only be described as an egg, a flying egg. And I remember looking out my window and just being filled with this incredible calmness, and it was really bright white. And I remember the following morning I spoke to my father and said, "What do you think it could be, Dad?" And he gave me a book. And I don't know if you remember, Phil, you might remember these, but the Unexplained, and there was like a part where...
Yes, I had the whole lot. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and it gave me the first volume, and as an 8-year-old boy with that on me, it nearly broke my leg. And I'm sat reading it, and I was just blown away by how much stuff there is in the world that is unexplained. But I was particularly interested in, of course, ghosts and UFOs, so I started reading up on UFOs and stuff. Went to a few conferences as a young boy. I started collecting, the videos and DVDs, audio tapes. I was a subscriber to UFO magazine when the Birdsall brothers ran it for many years. I used to save up my pocket money and pay for these files to be sent and all sorts. And then it was in the 90s, so it must have been about 96, 97 time, Chris, when it was in the Old Daily Mail that this guy in West Hull called Chris was setting up Hull UFO Society. And I remember... I
wonder who that was.
Yeah, my dad said, "Look at this." I came, and it was at the Lonsdale Centre.
Yep.
And I met you there, and we became friends. And it just took off from there, really. And I mean, one of the most interesting ones for me is the stuff that predates the kind of 1947 flap. And this is stuff like the 1801 UFO, and then the earlier stuff. I'm really fascinated by scare ships. And Hull went through a number of scare ship sightings, through the early 1900s, and I found them quite fascinating. So I've been doing a lot of research on them, spending a lot of time in the archives and stuff like that. I also went to the National Archives and got all the files from the UFO release that covered Hull and East Yorkshire, and spent a lot of time, communicating with Humberside Police. They were very adamant that they weren't interested in the UFO phenomena, but they had UFO reporting files in their logs, which to me indicates that there might be something to it. A number of sightings that I got were from police officers. So there's quite a few years of sort of cases that I've gone through. But I do like the early stuff, the stuff that you've got to really go into the archives. And of course, these are so old, there is no one around that will, there's no one around you can interview or anything like that. But I spent quite a lot of time researching scare ships, and I just found it fascinating, and this was in a period when, obviously there was a lot of intense activity going on between Great Britain and Germany, and there was a lot of saber rattling. And shortly after we had these scare ship sightings in Hull was bombed by the Zeppelins. That adds an interesting angle. But for me, the 1801 UFO scare was just astounding. I mean, this was one that took place in June 1801, and between 12 and 1 o'clock in the morning, people of Hull saw this bright blue light heading towards the city. And when it got over Hull, it split into 4 or 5 pieces and shot out, then joined back together again, and then took off. And that, to me, there's no astronomical, there's nothing in kind of, the astronomy circles that can account for something like that. I could understand it flying towards them, because that could be a celestial body of some sort flying towards the town, and I could understand it breaking up, because that could be the celestial body coming through the atmosphere and breaking up. But then I cannot explain why it joined back together and flew off. That to me doesn't indicate any known craft or anything that would have been in the skies at that time. So that was fascinating.
Yeah, this sighting in 1801, it's a lot of people, well, I know it was in the national press, I think it was about 2 years ago now, Mike, if I'm correct, where it actually was described as quite probably one of the first ever UFO sightings in this country. And that's, of course, not counting the monks at Byland Abbey, of course, but, it's a very, very, very interesting point. It really is. The whole thing is, though, is what I like about what you do, Mike, is how much time and effort you put into going into the local archives, sitting there for what must be days on end, and actually investigating all these strange and weird and wonderful things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've had some days in there where, if you've ever done it, you'll know. You have good days and you have bad days. I've gone in there some days and come out with 20, 30 pieces of paper with newspaper reports on and official files. And other days I've gone in there and found nothing and come out so disheartened and down. But it's them moments when you do find something.
Can I just interrupt there, Mike? Do they still have microfiche?
They do.
Yeah, I remember going through the microfiche myself.
Yeah.
And like you said, sometimes you'll get a run of things and you think, oh boy, I'm on a roll here. And then the next time, zilch. I mean, it's the local gymkhana or, local fairs, and that's it.
Yeah, that happened a lot. I was basically, some days I would go in and come away with, a folder full of UFO reports that had been published centuries ago. And then other times I'd go in and find nothing. And a few occasions as well, I'd read stuff in like 14 Times where it said, we got this from the Hull Daily Mail, and it gives you a date. And I've gone into the Hull Daily Mail archives and gone through on them, the microfiche reader and your arms, twisting it, and it's not there. And I
can just see some listeners now, especially of a younger generation, thinking, what the hell are they talking about? What's a microfiche? where can I find a microfiche app on my phone,
It's not a small goldfish, is it? It's not a tiddler.
No. Well, we're quite lucky now in that what they've done is the old. I don't know if you remember the really old ones where you had to wind them up with your hands. We've got new ones in Hull that you press a button and it does it all for you, which is a lot more easier. But it's still not text searchable, so you can't just sit down and type in UFO and it'll bring up all these reports. You've literally got to sit there and go month by month and day by day, and of course 3 or 4 issues a day, and it's time consuming. It makes you tired. Your eyes go really funny after a while. But especially, like with the 1801 UFO report, that was one that I'd literally spent. I'd spent about 3 months trying to track down as many newspaper reports on that as possible. And I found stuff in Northampton, in Chester. It had been published locally. A number of magazines at the time were publishing it, especially sort of astronomical magazines, because people were asking, what is it? So I was going through all these newspaper reports, and of course they're never published on the same day. So you're looking, days and days and days, and then they're never sort of, the report might have taken place in June, but the newspapers might not pick up on it for another month. So you've got months and months of papers to go through to try and find that single piece of evidence. But then when you find it, it's kind of like that eureka moment. You get that feeling in the back of your neck, the hair stand on end, and it's a great feeling because you've got another piece of the puzzle that would have been otherwise missing.
Is it not curious as well, Mike, that when you look at the sightings more closely, like you obviously have done, that what people will actually see and reporting bears no resemblance to an airship of any description. It's just that they impart, the technology of the day on the phenomena that they encounter. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah. I mean, what's interesting about, when you go into sort of the early 1900s, when, airships were being tested and stuff like that, in Hull down the road from us, we had Howden. There was a lot of airships being built out there at that time. So they were in the popular sort of conscience. Whereas if you go right back to sort of the early 1800s, there was nothing like that. Yeah. So, when we've got this ball of light, is that because there is nothing in the sky at that time? I believe round about that period, people were testing balloons and things like that, but nothing that could split apart and join back together and fly off.
Not those Chinese lanterns again, Mike.
yeah. I think we can rule them out in this instance.
So we've got the 1801 case there, then, Mike, and obviously it's very strange. Splitting apart, coming back together. What is some of the latest reports that you've had?
Well, the book kind of covers right up to sort of the early 2000s. But one that I really got involved with, there was a couple of cases. One of them was the Hull Hum of 2010, and that was basically my wife and I were in bed one evening. Someone had...
Now, don't go too far. Don't go too far.
Someone had tried to steal a bike from one of my family members. So my family were all in the street, and back then there was 4 members of my family all lived on the same street. So everyone would all come out and we'd all look after each other. And basically what happened was someone had tried to steal a bike. So there was a lot of commotion in the street. So we'd got up and we'd gone down and we'd made sure everyone was okay. We went back up to bed. It was quite a hot night. I remember there was some sort of summer fair on at East Park. That was long finished. We was laid in bed, and it sounded like 747 was about to land on East Hull. Just this roar of engines, really, really loud. It was like a loud humming noise, and we just couldn't believe it. And basically what happened was the following morning I got up and posted on Facebook. Did anyone in Hull hear this strange noise last night? And I was inundated with messages, and basically what happened was around 60 people from across Hull and East Yorkshire contacted me and said, look, we heard it. And I was able to plot a map, and with all the times and stuff, it wasn't like a flight path. This was literally like something that dropped out the clouds, made a loud noise, then disappeared. And from that point on, I got in touch with the Civil Aviation Authority. I got in touch with the Ministry of Defence. I have a lot of contacts in the media, so I got in touch with the BBC and the Hull Daily Mail, and they were also making inquiries, and we were all kind of pooling our information in a bid to get to the bottom of it. And while this is going on, people are coming forward with suggestions and theories. So we was researching them. I mean, one of them was that it was a Russian plane, but we found out that there was no Russian planes in the sky at that time over Britain. Mm-hmm. So it kind of rules out the Russian plane. Another one said, well, there was evidence of a Russian plane flying between London and Manchester or something like that. But we'd found out that had been grounded for about 3 hours before we'd heard this sound. And it was really weird because then, people were coming in, and someone actually came in and said, we thought it was an airship, which was interesting. Someone said they thought it was a double prop plane. Someone said it was a 4-prop plane. There was all these different theories about what it could have been. And while this was going on, the Hull Daily Mail were getting in touch with me to say what they'd picked up. And the Civil Aviation Authority got in touch, and they said that they had nothing flying at that time. The MOD got in touch and they said they had nothing in the air over that period of time. They were baffled by it. Really, really interesting. And we had Humberside Police got involved, and they said that they had some police officers on Spring Bank, and they heard it, and they came and looked up in the sky, but there was nothing in the sky. And it was just really bizarre. It's never been satisfactorily explained. But what was interesting is, like an urban legend where you've got like the original story, then the story gets twisted. Newspapers and magazines were picking up on this, and various websites and stuff like that. And one of them said that I was actually a member of the Civil Aviation Authority, and that I was researching it on behalf of the Civil Aviation Authority. And I said, well, I'm not. I'm a member of the public who's heard this, and I'm sort of approaching the Civil Aviation Authority. And then one day I remember picking up a book a couple of years later called Shadows in the Sky by Neil Arnold. And the story was featured in there, and it talks about us and what we'd heard and stuff like that. And that was fascinating because I ended up with a paper trail that you could fill a folder with. And to this day we still don't know what it was. Lots of people came forward with theories, and we managed to track all these various aeroplanes all over the place, and none of them were flying over Hull at that time. And people were reporting this from places like Whitby, Witherinsea, Hornsey, and then all the way up the other way past Selby, Goole, places like that. So this was heard in a massive radius. We just don't know what it was.
Yeah, very, very weird. Now, I do know both myself and you have an interest in some of the older UFO cases in the area. For example, we've got the Warren Primary School, and we've got Anlaby as well, another school in Anlaby, and we've also got the incident on Long Hill playing fields there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, Mike?
Yeah, well, this was actually a case that my dad had told me about when I was a young lad. He said to me, this was before I was born. This was in 1967. So, and basically, he told me that his friend was involved in a UFO case on Long Hill. And I said to him, well, who's your friend? And he said he's called Steve, and he was a witness to a UFO landing. And, I was fascinated by it. And then Steve passed away, and I was unable to talk to him. And I remember I spent absolutely ages trying to get to the bottom of this. And it was really interesting because I spoke to, can't remember her name now, a lady that used to write for the Hull Daily Mail. And she used to write a column. And I remember her covering this subject in her column. And I was lecturing once, and she turned up at my lecture. And we were talking about also, and at that time she was writing a play about Jack the Ripper, and I sort of said to her, I'd love to be able to help you with Jack the Ripper stuff. But what I'm really interested in is this UFO thing at Long Hill. And she said to me, I cannot remember when I wrote the article, but it was sometime in the 90s. So I went through all of the newspaper columns, couldn't find it. But what I did find was an article that was written in the Hull Daily Mail in October 1970. And this said that in July 1967, a number of things had been spotted over East Yorkshire, lights and so on. So I was able to kind of hone in on 67 as a year. And then I eventually found it. And what I did was I kind of went backwards. I found a newspaper report published in Flashback. And for those that don't know what Flashback is a monthly newspaper published in Hull that is for heritage, history.
It contains a lot of old photographs, doesn't it? And a lot of old information about various areas of the city. And
they do a column in that says on this day 10 years ago, on this day 20 years ago, and so on. And it sort of said that that on this day in 1967, children in Hull spotted a white cigar shaped object landing in Long Hill on a park. And it said it was 30 years ago this month. So that then gave me November 1967 as a date. And I was able to go back then through the archives, and I eventually found in the Old Daily Mail November 16th, 1967, the full article on it where it talks about the children, it gives the names, where they lived and things like that, the name of the police officer. So I was then able to go and research that further. Now it mentions Steve, who was friends with my dad. He was mentioned in the articles, and he passed away some years ago. But he was said to have been one of the principal boys involved in the case. He was 14 at the time, and he was a pupil at Eastmount High School, and he said there was a bright object on the hill about 150 yards away. I walked up to about 50 yards from it. It was cigar-shaped and creamy white. It hovered on the hill, and then a red light started to flash, and it made a humming sound like a baby's humming top. It seemed to stand up as if it was on moving legs, then shot off into the sky, circled around and disappeared. And it was really interesting because at that time, there was a lot of other newspapers publishing stuff about UFOs in Great Britain. But what happened with the old Daily Mail is they followed the story up. They started to run articles day after day after day, and they would approach different people for it. For example, at one point they approached the Hull Astronomical Society and said, "Can you give us information?" And they gave a theory. There was even a theory that Yorkshire Water was somehow involved, and it was possibly a helicopter from Yorkshire Water.
I think I seem to remember that being mentioned as Yorkshire Electricity.
Yeah, Yorkshire.
But it's okay. Carry on, Mike.
Yorkshire Electricity Board. And it said that they'd made an emergency landing in the park. And it said such a landing could produce the lights and sounds seen by these children. It doesn't explain the shape. Not sure what the helicopters look like in '67, but pretty sure they don't look like a cigar. No. And then there was in 1970, there was a newspaper report about the history of UFO reports in Hull. And it mentioned again that a group of boys had seen it, and it said we've approached Colin Watson, who was quite a popular name in the old newspapers. Colin Watson was, I believe he was involved in astronomy, but he used to take on a lot of local UFO reports. And all the newspaper reports from the 60s and 70s, they always went to him and spoke to him, and he'd give his kind of view and opinion. And Watson came forward and said he believed it was a helicopter. But the interesting thing, I got in touch with Officer Jack Sykes and spoke to him. I got in touch with his family about whether or not they had his logbook, and they didn't. Then I got in touch with Humberside Police. Now, Humberside Police, their archives are now held at the East Riding Archives in Beverley. So I went there and asked them if they had Police Officer Jack Sykes' notebook, and it took them a few days to get back to me, but they said it wasn't present in their collection, leading them to believe it was either destroyed or it's somewhere else. So it's a bit frustrating, really. But yeah, it's a fascinating case, and really, I visited the park, and it's quite an eerie place. It's kind of out on a limit, right at the edge of the city boundary, isn't it? And it's
yes, it is. Yeah. And of course, there's the what we in Hull in East Yorkshire call the drain. Drain, D-R-A-I-N, next to it, which is like a man-made dike, really, a river to take away water from the floodplains out into the River Humber. So that makes it a little bit more spooky as well, because it's right next to all this, isn't it?
Yeah, if you stand one way and look, you can see blocks of flats and a modern school, and then when you turn around, it's just an expanse of fields, really. So this is right on the edge of the city, and even though Hull has expanded greatly around that park, it hasn't. That park is still right on the edge of the country, right near the green belt. So you can stand there at night and look out into just a vast nothingness.
You're not only interested in UFOs and ghosts, you're actually, well, I know for a fact that you're actually seen as one of the authorities on a certain gentleman from London who in the late 1800s became known as Jack the Ripper. Or was he from London, Mike?
Basically, when I came to the Jack the Ripper case, this was again from my dad. He had his own theories and his own stories, and he used to set me on his knee and as a kid and tell me all these stories. And then as I grew up, I wanted to research these. And one of his theories was that it was a doctor that lived on Church Street in Drypool, which is no longer there. But I found out what it was actually talking about was a guy who was from Church Street in Schullcote, which is at the other side of the river. And I just started researching the connections between these individuals and the case, and these individuals and Hull. And I uncovered 14 different suspects from Hull with links to the Jack the Ripper case, from notorious multiple murderers, all the way down to, thieves, writers, researchers, and it's just fascinating, and it's really it's been such a laugh and researching them, because it took me on such a weird journey. One minute I'm in London lecturing about them, the next minute I'm at a school talking to school kids, because in Hull at the minute Jack the Ripper's on the syllabus. So it's been really bizarre, yeah. So my daughter came home from school the other day and she was like, "You'll never guess what," and she was doing Jack the Ripper. So I sat her down, put about 200 books on her knee and said, "There you go, read them." But yeah, and it's a fascinating case. It's weird as well, because one of the guys I was researching was from Hull. He lived in Schullcoats, he lived near Barmston Drain, and he wrote ghost stories about Barmston Drain. And he also worked on Whiteford as well. So there's a lot of local links between this individual, and he was linked to people like Aleister Crowley, Madame Blavatsky, all these kind of weird and wonderful people from the spiritualism and theosophy movements and stuff like that. So he was a really interesting character, absolutely fascinating. And I don't think he was Jack the Ripper, but as a person, as an individual, he's just fascinating. He wrote about weird stuff from black magic. He reckons that he saw someone levitate. He reckons he was asleep in Paris, but his body woke up and he was in Germany, and all this kind of stuff. And really, really fantastic kind of Victorian.
So have you got a prime suspect then, Mike? You've done all this research on Jack the Ripper. I remember when I think the only time we met, first time, I beg your pardon, I asked you if you got a prime suspect. The reason I ask is because I've got an old friend. Sadly, he's ill. He's ill, and the one thing in this field that fascinates him is Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
And he's not an expert. He's just an interest in it. And, come on, who was it, Mike? Come on.
Well, if I knew that, I'd be a millionaire. I've not got a prime suspect per se. I like looking at the genealogy side of them and where they came from and what they did in their life and why they're suspects. One of the most interesting people I've researched was Frederick Billy Demon. Demon was a multiple murderer. He killed his first wife and 4 kids. He killed his third wife. He was a bigamist. He was in Hull at one point. He got sent to Hull prison for 9 months for fraud. When he came out, a girl was murdered down the road with a throat cut. So he was a bit of a character. And in 1892, he was arrested in Australia. The police eventually caught him. And it came out that he was supposedly in Whitechapel in 1888. A dressmaker said she could identify him. A gentleman in Canada said that he'd seen Demon, and Demon had letters from one of the victims. And there was a lot of circumstantial evidence. But the authorities just kind of played it down. I mean, they've got the man for one of the murders, so they just hung him in 1892, and that was the end of it, really.
Yeah. Do you think it was one person? I mean, I know one piece I read, and I haven't read much. I'd admit that, Mike, that they reckon that there may have been multiple murderers. That some of them were copycat, for want of a better word, or that the police just lumped them all together at the time because they couldn't figure it out anyway. You think there was just one person involved, or were there several murderers?
Well, this is the thing, you see. This is quite an old theory. Basically, the idea is that things like Elizabeth Stride, for example, some people believe that she was killed by a partner at the time, and he just killed her in such a fashion that she would be linked in with the Jack the Ripper murders. Some people argue that the final victim, Mary Kelly, wasn't even Mary Kelly, that Mary Kelly was seen by eyewitnesses in the street after the murder had supposedly taken place. So some people believe that the victim in there wasn't her but someone else. And then some people link that murder to another individual. So there's all these theories about who it was. And it's fascinating because it's when you get involved in the minutiae of all these individuals and what they were doing and why they were in Whitechapel at that time. And, there's so... I mean, the last book that came out on suspects had over 300 suspects in.
Oh, boy.
When you've got a suspect pool that big, it's just crazy, you know.
Am I right? Am I right in saying? I think my pal told me that one of the suspects was Polish. Is that right?
Kosminski was a Polish Jewish gentleman. A couple of years ago, a theory came out that they'd found a shawl, and on the shawl there was DNA evidence that Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. And this produced a book which was a bestseller. It produced a museum with affiliated tours. And then it actually came out that the DNA wasn't as 100% as they made out in the book. It was actually flawed. And the item that they tested, the shawl, we'd actually tested it before that for a TV show, and we couldn't find any valuable DNA on it. And also, the shawl itself has no real provenance. There was no evidence connecting it to the Jack the Ripper case, because the police officer who supposedly had it in his possession wasn't linked to the East End of London. So it's all, and it wasn't even a shawl, it was a table running.
So why is it, Mike? I mean, you know, you can pretty much go around the world and mention Jack the Ripper, and people will know the phrase, if not a lot about the case. What is it about the Jack the Ripper murders that makes it stand out and be such a hot topic of debate even today?
Well, I think one of the reasons is they were never caught. I think the other reason is that if you go through the history of Great Britain, it was kind of one of the first serial murderers that actually had this massive media attention. Right. You know, brand new newspapers were formed just to cover Jack the Ripper. In the East End of London, there were 2 or 3 newspapers published, and by the end of it, there was about 10. You know, so
what you're saying is it was saleable.
Yeah, it was the name. You know, some people believe the name was created by an enterprising journalist who'd written the letter himself that's called himself Jack the Ripper and done it just to sell newspapers.
Well, exactly the same with Kenneth Arnold and flying saucers. Kenneth Arnold did never said, "I saw a flying saucer." That phrase was invented by a journalist.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. A lot of the stories I've been involved in, I've told their stories, and then when you read it in the paper, it's completely different, and it makes you laugh because, you know, some of the cases I've worked on, the Humber sea serpent being one of them, that when the newspaper report started getting published, it said Mike is the head of the Humber Monster Watch. Which is not even an entity.
No, I mean, I can believe that, Mike.
It doesn't exist.
If it doesn't exist, you've got to set it up, mate. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, they rang me up and said, how many people are in the Humber Monster Watch? And at the time, I was sat next to my son, and I just said, there's just me and my son. And she said, what does it actually entail? You know, and the Fortean Times wrote an article about it and said, even though the creature's not been seen for 70 years, Mike still walks up and down the Humber, which couldn't be further from the truth. But, you know, it's so funny because they've done it with a lot of my stories. That there was one where I was in a cemetery a few years ago and I spotted a young gentleman and a young lady, and they were making a movie. They weren't wearing many clothes, and they were in the middle of lovemaking. And at the time, it was just my friend and myself. And my friend,
I'm sorry, gentlemen. I'm laughing, Mike, because I knew he was going to mention this.
This was a genuine event that happened. My friend saw these people filming this porn film and said, "Don't look now, but there's a naked lady in the cemetery." And we just stood there in shock because, you know, she's naked and the guy's naked and they've got a film crew. And my friend Terry shouted at them, and the next, you know, by the time it ends up in the newspaper, it said that Hull Ghost Hunter is investigating cemetery in the middle of the night, which wasn't true, it was the middle of the day. And it is with all these people, and they invented a complete cast of characters. There was an old man shaking his stick. You know, there was all these people with me, and it wasn't like that at all, but it was so funny because when we filmed Paranormal Lockdown in Pontefract, the first time I met Nick Roth from Ghost Adventures and Paranormal Lockdown, he walked up to me and shook my hand and he said, "You're the cemetery porn guy, aren't you?"
Oh dear. It just shows you really, doesn't it, that, you know, we can't trust any forms of media really. All they're interested in is getting it's like certain movies. It's getting bums on seats. It's getting people to read, and that's why they have these fantastic headlines. Like Freddie Starr ate my hamster. And for those who don't know, Freddie Starr is, he's a comedian who was quite popular in the 70s and 80s. He's a singer from the 60s who went to comedy, and one of the headlines was "He ate my hamster," which is completely and utterly untrue, but it was done to sell newspapers.
Yeah.
Oh dear me.
It's happened a lot.
It does happen a lot, Mike. You're absolutely right. I also know, Mike, you mentioned Barmston Drain there a moment ago, or as we call it in Hull, and remember there's no H in Hull. We call it Barmy Drain, and you mentioned, I know you've investigated the beast of Barmston Drain. Now, I will say, from about 1962 or 3 up to 1970-71, I actually lived down Schoolcoats Lane on Bournemouth Street, which was the street right next to Barmston Drain in that area, near the old, you'll know it, Mike, the old Needler's chocolate factory there.
That well.
Yep, and I never, ever heard one story about Old Stinker. Do you want to tell us about Old Stinker, Mike?
Well, again, this is another one. Old Stinker is more up towards Paul Sinclair's neck of the woods. What happened was a friend of mine had seen something on Schoolcoats Lane, and he'd asked me to put a call out to see if other people had seen something similar. Now, what he saw was a ghostly boy coming from one of the cemeteries. So I put a status on Facebook and said, has anyone seen anything weird on Schoolcoats Lane? And I was inundated with people saying that on Barmston Drain they'd seen something that they could only describe as a creature. So when pushed further, I said, what sort of creature? Now, some people said it was like a big giant wolf. Some people said it was like a very hairy man, which if you ever go out on Barmy Drain on a night, you'll see a lot of that anyway. And then some people said it was a shapeshifter. And I ended up with 14 different reports from 14 individuals that were all unknown to each other, all describing the same thing on a very small stretch between Wincolm Lee and Schoolcoats Lane, which you can walk that area in 10 minutes. And people were seeing it from cars, they were seeing it as they were walking on a night. One of them had seen it on his bike. And basically what had happened was I wrote a report about this for the Hull Daily Mail and said, this is what people are seeing. Has anyone else seen it? In a bid to get people to come forward and share their stories. And the national media got hold of this, and they've actually put the theory forward that this was Old Stinker based on the fact that Barmston Drain goes all the way up to Barmston, which is quite near, not far from Flixton, which of course is where Old Stinker was knocking about. So they've put 2 and 2 together and come up with 6. So they kind of put them 2 legends together and made their own little story. And it was really funny because the story was originally published in the Hull Daily Mail. I believe it went on a Friday. And by the weekend it had gone viral. It was all over. It was on. It was in all the national newspapers. It was in all the tabloids. It was on hundreds of blogs. People were coming from all over to try and look for it. There was actually a group that came out to Barmston Drain where it's near Beverley, and they went to Asden, bought a chicken and hung a chicken from a bridge, then wondered why nothing happened, because that's not where the sightings are. There was actually, in the media, it was kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek, really, because the British media was sort of saying, there's this group in Hull and they walk around on a night with torch and pitchforks, and it wasn't like that at all. It was literally like a paranormal investigation. We had night vision cameras and stuff. Didn't find anything. We found a few things that not really conclusive but interesting. And then I sort of said to the media, look, why don't you come and join the hunt? Why don't you come with us and see what we can find together? And they came to Hull, and I took them down Barmston Drain in the middle of the night. And as we got to the bottom of Fountain Road, Stepney Lane, there was some movement in some bushes. And we went sort of level with this movement, and we shone the torch across, and we could see green eyes shine coming back at us. But whatever it was had a big head. And Charles Richardson was there with us. He's written a few books on folklore and stuff like that. He couldn't identify it. His wife was there. She's really good on animal tracking and stuff. She couldn't identify it. And as we're watching, another one pops up next to it. So there's 2 creatures looking at us. We don't know what they are. I turned around to the assembled Wales media, and they'd all run off down Skullcoats Lane. So I caught up with them and said, why did you run? And they said, well, we've heard reports that you can jump over the drain. And the next day, in all fairness to them, they actually published the report as it happened and said, look, this is what we found. We saw these weird green eyes. We don't know what they were. And then, TV shows got involved. I took Vice TV out, and we got some compelling evidence. There was a big bang in a very wooded undergrowth area, and it sounded like something large had fallen from a tree. And this was in the middle of the night. It was about midnight. It was pouring down with rain. And the cameraman turned round, and behind him was a gentleman stood in shorts and T-shirts watching us in the middle of this really wooded area. And he just kind of looked and walked off. So that the film crew were really freaking out about this. And then we went a little bit further, and they could hear dogs howling and stuff, and it was quite eerie, And on Skullcoats Lane, you'll know yourself, there's all the cemeteries around there. So that adds to the atmosphere. And when they showed it on film, they actually showed it as it happened, and I was really surprised about that, because I thought they were going to take the mick out of us a little bit. We've just recently shot with the Travel Channel. We filmed Monsterlands, Werewolf Encounters with them last year. That's just aired in the US, but it's not been on in Britain yet, so I've yet to watch that. But I did have a friend contact me, and she said that she'd watched it and seen us in it, and it went down quite well. We've had people from all walks of life come down, from students, paranormal investigators, cryptozoologists, animal experts. We found stuff. We found big piles of scat. We found a grave that was open with scratch marks, claw marks in it. We don't know what's happened there. We found animals that are ripped apart, just completely shredded, and all that's left is blood and fur. We found quite a lot of that along the drain, and more so towards the cemeteries on Skullcoats Lane. We don't know what's causing this. It's a really bizarre case. I don't personally believe there's a werewolf out there, but the evidence that people are coming forward with is quite compelling, and these reports go right back. The earliest one I think we had was from the 50s, when the old railway line was there. And we've had people come forward. A gentleman from the Hull City Council Dangerous Dogs Department got in touch and said that he'd been called out because someone had seen a wolf on Barmston Drain during the 1980s, and when he got down to the drain, people were visibly shaken. But when he got there, he could find no evidence of it. And then, we spoke to the guys who was at the garage, the MOT garage, and they'd said they'd reported stuff. And I did a lecture in Nottingham, and at the end, a guy approached me and said that he used to live on Skullcoats Lane as a little boy, and he remembers walking down the track to build a den with his friends, and he went through the undergrowth and stood in something that was all sloppy and really hot. And he looked down and he said there was the carcass of a wolf, but he refused to tell his mum and dad because he thought he'd get in trouble. And it's just things like that where you're so close to the evidence, but then so far away. So that was quite frustrating.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's like searching for Bigfoot, isn't it, or the Sasquatch? Evidence seems to be there to suggest, but nothing is ever conclusive. This is why we're all fascinated and interested in this subject, because we're all looking for that evidence that's going to, hit the nail on the head, to put it bluntly. I mean, like Mike, I live close to De Grey Street. I also used to live down Bournemouth Street, as I say, which is at the end of Skullcoats Lane. Those two graveyards you've talked about, I hate to admit it now, perhaps with a little bit of embarrassment, but as a kid, we used to play in those graveyards, but we never ever heard anything about werewolves or strange goings on in those areas. And like I said before, I lived in those areas for maybe 8 or 9 years of my early years on this planet, and not once did I ever hear anything about these kind of things.
Mr. Evers might be one of your suspects, I reckon. He's just incriminating himself here. He's been in all these areas.
I'm old enough to be Jack the Ripper. Oh dear me, I don't know. So, what kind of things are you planning now, Mike? What you doing? What kind of books are you looking at?
At the moment, I'm working on a new series of books. They're part of the Mike Covell Investigate series. I'm just about finished on one about Hull's urban legends. You might have seen me ask the question the other day just to get people, to tease people a little bit. What do people consider Hull's urban legends? I've been working on a investigation of the Screaming Skull at Burton Agnes Hall. That's just about finished. And then recently, I've just I've just finished writing. Let me see. I've got that many. Here we go. I've just completed a book about Jack the Ripper's connections to Beverly, which I finished, and I've just finished writing a book about ghost sightings in East Yorkshire. And the reason why I worked on that project is if you ever pick up a book about ghosts in Yorkshire, they talk about North Yorkshire. You'll find maybe 30 East Drive in West Yorkshire, they talk about that. Stuff in Leeds, Whitby, York, but they'll never talk about East Yorkshire. We always kind of get left out. And I thought it warranted a book of its own. And, I thought we've got Bert and Agnes, we've got Bert and Constable, we've got Skipsy. We've got a few tales, really, that can kind of fill a book. And I ended up, and it's over 270 odd pages long. There's 100 case studies in there, and what I did with that is I actually travelled around and went to the villages and spoke to people in the villages, and it was great. Met a lot of people, and it's like a census really of ghost sightings in East Yorkshire, and again had some great.
Sorry, Mike, I was just going to say it is usually, if you do get one mentioned from East Yorkshire, it's usually the Bert and Agnes event, isn't it? With the skull that's supposed to be buried in the wall there somewhere.
Well, what I did with the Bert and Agnes one, I had this story growing up. There's a screaming skull at Bert and Agnes, and I started researching it and discovered that there was quite a lot of different variations on the story. So I thought it'd be great to have a book just full of every single variation on the story. At the moment, the book is almost finished. It's not completed. It's 210 pages long. But in terms of references, there's over 400 references in there, 400 different stories. But, all covering the idea of a screaming skull. And the weird thing is, the skull supposedly comes from the head of Anne Griffith, who was a girl who lived at the hall, and she was murdered, and she was buried in the church. Then she was exhumed, and her dad was the owner of the hall. And I went through the family tree of the family and discovered that she doesn't even exist. There's no record of her being murdered. There's no record. He was a justice of the peace. He was involved heavily with the law, and yet he never launched the investigation into his own daughter's death. There's no record of her being buried. There's no record of her being exhumed. If you go in the church, there's nothing that indicates she was buried in the church. But coincidentally, if you do go in the church that's adjacent to the hall, the Griffith family tomb has skull motifs on it. So I think what's happened is the story's just grown. It's been told and retold and grown and grown and grown. And the interesting thing is, if you go into the history of Bert and Agnes, in the early 1800s, a servant girl was actually assaulted near St. John's Well, which is where Catherine Griffith was supposedly attacked, and she was beaten about the head and suffered skull injuries. I think what's happened is people have heard that story, and over the years it's been told and retold, and then they've connected it locally to the hall, and now you have this wonderful story that's, it's fiction. So yeah, I've been working on that one. It's nearly finished. I've been working on it for a few years now, travelling all over Yorkshire, getting sources and heavily researching that in the archives, and made numerous trips to Bert and Agnes as well. And every time I go, I always chat to the different tour guides that are on and get their opinion as to where the skull is, because they all have different opinions. Nobody really knows where it is, and I find it fascinating. It's an interesting story. But yeah, I've been working on that one. That is as good as finished. I've just got a few more little bits and bobs to put into that.
Excellent. Well, I'll look forward to looking at that one when it comes out, most definitely. Now, obviously, over the years that you've been interested in the strange and the weird and the wonderful, you've looked into many, many cases, as we've discussed some of those just now in this interview. But if you could pick your favourite case of all time that you've looked into yourself, whether it's from Hull, whether it's national, international, or whatever, what would you pick? What would be your favourite case?
Oh, tough one. I don't know. I've always wanted to go to Loch Ness and do the whole Loch Ness monster thing. That's always fascinated me. I don't know. It's a tough one. I like the local stuff. I mean, the one that really got me was the whole Humber sea serpent thing. because that was a story that no one had ever written about, and it's not in any of the books. No one had ever covered that story before. When I found the first newspaper report about this, I just thought, wow, this is fascinating. And I spent months researching it and ended up with hundreds of newspaper reports. And only the people that were seeing stuff in the Humber were fishermen and trawlermen, people that should know the sea. And I wrote an article about it for the Old Daily Mail, and I was really disappointed because, I wrote it a couple of years ago now. Nobody really paid attention to it. And I thought, this has got all the potential to be a fantastic story, and no one's really, it's not really took off. It's not made waves. And it was about 6 months later, a reporter rang me up and said, we've just gone over some old stories and we've found this story you wrote about the Umber Monster. We'd love to have an interview with you. So they interviewed me, and it took off dramatically, and it went viral, and everyone was talking about it. And we actually went and shot some footage with the BBC, and we went down to the Humber and filmed along the Humber for the day, and it was great fun. And then what was weird about that is that when the story picked back up again, the Old Daily Mail started covering it again, and one of the reporters, a guy called David, rang me up, and he was real excited. And it was round the corner from where I live, and he said, can I pop to your house for a minute? I've got something to show you. And he came round and he literally had a handwritten letter that was signed and dated by a gentleman that claims he saw it when he was a young boy. And it just kept growing and growing, and people kept coming forward. And then it was weird because these reports were from the 1930s and 1920s and 1930s. There was no recent reports that we knew of. And within the space of a few weeks, people were contacting us and saying things. They'd seen stuff out near Nepal, they'd been out at Spen and heard things in the water. So there was a lot of recent sightings coming through as well. So that has been absolutely fascinating. And a really interesting case I worked on was the Silver Hatchet Gang. That was for a book I wrote a couple of years back. The Silver Hatchet Gang were kind of like the Peaky Blinders. They were like based in Hull in the early 1900s. Between 1901 and around about 1916, 1917, they were in Hull. Basically, what they would do is they would work on the timber yards, they would threaten people, they had gambling places, they were involved in prostitution, really notorious criminals. And when I was researching that book, people contacted me and said, be careful, that they're still around and this, that, and the other. And I thought that was great, that was fascinating. And when the book was published, to coincide with it, there was an article published, and Humberside Police rang me up one night, and it was a guy from Humberside Police who was a senior detective. I'll not mention his name, but he's always in paper. And he basically rang me up and said, I've read your article on the Silver Hatchet Gang, and I thought he had, maybe some new information about being active. And he said one of the gentlemen you mentioned was my great-great-grandfather, and he was a member of the Silver Hatchet Gang. So that was great. I got his side of the story. And then in recent weeks, a lady had bought it for her dad, and her dad's an elderly gentleman, and he actually wrote me a handwritten letter, which I've still got on my desk because it only came through the post the other day. It was basically him saying that he believed he knew members of the Silver Hatchet Gang when he was a young boy. He was told that his father and his uncles and his grandfather were all members, and he actually named the pub in Hull in Schullcoats that was linked to the Silver Hatchet Gang. So I've been slowly reading through this letter, and then just yesterday another lady contacted me through social media, and she said that she had spoke to her father, and her father said that he remembers as a young boy being in the groves around Lime Street area. He remembers that the Hatchet Gang were quite right from there, and he named names, so I've got loads of new avenues of research to pursue, and the possibility of launching a second volume to that if I can get round to it.
Do you think the reports such as the Umber sea serpent, etc., going back to the 1930s, obviously this is the time, of course, when the Loch Ness monster became known in the mid or to early 1930s, when it was reported that this couple driving by Loch Ness had seen this creature run across the road and into the loch itself. Do you think it could be maybe a case of people jumping on the bandwagon and saying they'd seen something in the Umber?
Well, the earliest sighting reported on Loch Ness Monster was 1933. The Umber Sea Serpent was 1927.
Right, okay.
So it's kind of one predates the other. But then there was the running joke that the Humber Monster was Loch Ness Monster on holiday. In the late 80s. There was a lot of stories like that, which were quite interesting. So yeah, it's a weird one, because they both kind of came around roughly at the same time, but the Humber Monster predated it. Then there was stories in the Victorian period of Hull shipping lines going to America, and on the way over to America they were seeing stuff. And there was actually a report published in 1884 that states there was a Hull steamer, and it was called the Philadelphia Record, had published his newspaper report saying that this Hull steamer called Durham from Hull had gone to the Mediterranean, then across to Philadelphia, and on its way across it saw the sea serpent, and that was 1884. So there was reports coming in from that era. One of the earliest stories in our region was in 1922, when a strange fish was found from a Grimsby trawler called the Chandos, and it said that they pulled it on board and they'd never seen anything like it. It didn't look like a shark or a whale. It was about 50 foot long, and in the end they chucked it back overboard and left it. And that was going on quite a while. They were just off Spain when they saw that. In 1929 there was a couple off Hornsey that saw something. So there was reports that predated the Loch Ness monster by some years. It wasn't until sort of 1933, and Malcolm Robinson, of course, will testify. He's written quite a few books about Loch Ness monster. That really took off. And there was an interesting one actually in 1933 in December. It said Flamborough wanted its own monster story so they could cash in on it, and that was interesting because years later reports of sea serpents came in from Flamborough. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. One of the funniest things that happened during that period, if you go into the Transport Museum in Hull, right at the front entrance there's a makeshift office that would have been Thomas Shepherd's office, and Thomas Shepherd was the curator of Hull Museum, and in the corner of this display is an elephant foot, and it's basically used to put umbrellas in. And in 1933, he actually took the elephant's foot out to Spain Point and left prints in the floor leading all the way up to the road. And then he went in the local pub and rang the Hull Daily Mail, and the Hull Daily Mail turned up and took all these photos and reported that sea serpent footprints had been found, along the edge of Spain Point. And then a couple of days later, they actually reported the truth, and it was actually Mr. Thomas Shepherd in a bid to get people interested in the museums in Hull, and they've still got the elephant. He was a really clever guy. He was a bit like P.T. Barnum. He would come up with weird stuff that linked in with the newspapers of the time. But yeah, I mean, these reports are fascinating. Like I say, they're reported by people that are familiar with the sea. Most of these guys are trawlermen, fishermen, seamen, the guys that go out to the sea day in, day out, and yet they were seeing stuff they couldn't explain. It wasn't like, your average man and woman was going on holiday and seeing stuff. This was actually people that were out at sea catching stuff like this all the time. And they're really interesting because obviously you get reports from, people saying it might have been a school of porpoises, or it might have been a large seal. There were lots of theories at the time. And on the flip side of that, you've got these guys coming forward and saying, well, actually, we were seeing something that we can't quite explain. These are fantastic. They're fascinating.
Can I ask you something, Mike? I mean, it's one thing I like to ask, all paranormal investigators. You've talked about, have you seen anything yourself, apart from a couple making a porn movie in a cemetery? In all seriousness, I've got a couple of friends involved in the paranormal side of things.
I thought he was going to say the porn industry then, Phil.
But on your own investigations, or as part of a TV show where you've got the cameras or anything, have you ever witnessed anything yourself, Mike, that you think, well, I have no idea what that is?
Oh yeah. I mean, the earliest one, like I said, was the UFO sighting when I was 8. Over the years, we've had a number of incidents in our house. We actually had, when we moved in, the children were reporting stuff. They were reporting a man and a woman. I researched the history and discovered in 1945 the lady of the house was murdered in the living room. The lodger had basically took an axe and he'd stuck it in her head 6 times and dragged her into the room that I'm sitting in right now. And then he was sent to a lunatic asylum where he died. And then I went back further and discovered in 1929 the husband had disappeared in the Humber. It was washed up near Grimsby, and it looked like foul play, but they couldn't say with 100% certainty. And we've had stuff going on in the house. We've had stuff moving. We've had stuff disappearing. We've heard noises and things like that. But it's not like, when people say about haunted houses and stuff like that, it's not scary. It's home. And then on paranormal investigations, I've been scratched. I've seen objects move in the dark. I remember one night when we were out filming with the Travel Channel, we were in Skulcote Cemetery, and it was pitch black, and there was one light in the cemetery, and this light came from a factory at the back of the cemetery, and there was just this big, it was like a ball of steam, for want of a better word. I can't really explain it, and it flew towards us at such speed. It wasn't going upwards like you would expect it to, or dissipated. It flew towards us, and the film crew all moved out the way of it because we didn't know what it was, and I still can't explain that. That was weird. I've also been out on, I do a lot of stuff in East Yorkshire where I go out and look for big cats and stuff like that. I found paw print out near Bilton, and I was out with my son. We'd gone for a walk down the Hull to Withensea railway track, which is now a cycle path. And we got halfway down the track, and my friend lives parallel to the track, and I'd texted him, and he was at home. So I said, let's pop across and see him, and we'll have a cup of tea, and we'll rest for a bit. And on the way across, we were walking across the field, and there was just a big set of print across this field, and they were almost coming out of the corn right across the footpath, which was just mud. And they'd left the print, and I managed to, because we were only hiking at that point, I didn't have anything on me to measure it. So what I did was I stuck my phone on the floor and took a picture with my son's phone, and it showed that this thing was about maybe 5-6 inches across. So it was a big print. Don't know what it was. But that, stuff like that I've had quite a lot of. I have not seen the Umber Sea Serpent yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. No, I mean, the Umber Monster Watch will tell me if they see it.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's fair? You talked about the various paranormal TV shows that you personally have appeared on, and there is a number of others. Do you think they do some good for the paranormal research field, Mike, or do you think people think it's all a setup? Because I've heard accusations that some of the people on there are told when to scream or jump or make a noise or whatever. I don't know if that's true or not. But do you think people, tend to take them with a pinch of salt?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, all the stuff I've worked on, I've never been given a script. All the stuff I've been on, I've never been told to act this way or react this way. I've just had the camera shoved in my face and been sent out, really. So all the stuff I've been on, what I've seen, I've never seen anything that you would say was fraudulent or trying to hoodwink anyone. And I've never seen anything untoward, and I do watch. I do keep an eye out. I'm quite eagle-eyed, and I will watch people's feet and people's pockets and make sure no one's throwing stones or things like that. Mm-hmm. But then away from the TV shows, on paranormal investigations, I have found people that have carried out fraudulent activity. I've watched people ask for activity, then knock on tables, and then jump and say, "What was that?" And I've seen them actually doing it on night vision cameras. I've filmed them actually, knocking and things. So I have caught people, carrying out fraudulent activity. One of the best ones people love to do is they'll put tea light candles in a property, and through the night, obviously, when these start melting, the wax, people will pick up the wax and roll it into balls, then throw it in the dark. And if you've got night vision, you can pick up on that, and you can say to people, "Well, wait a minute, what the hell are you doing?" So I've caught people carrying out fraudulent activity, and I've exposed a few, and I've the same with a number of psychics. And what I love to do is I love to fact check. When they go to these haunted houses and they say, there was a murder here and this, that, and the other. I love researching that because I want to know more as a viewer. I want to know who these people are that were murdered and who the murderer was. So I will go into the archives and try and find out that information. A great example of that was a few years ago. I don't know if you remember, but Derek Okora, he came to Hull. Mm-hmm. He filmed series 2 of Ghost Towns in Hull, and he visited 3 or 4 properties in the city. And I tracked down the DVD. I remember watching it at the time, but I tracked down the DVD and I went through it almost frame by frame, noting all the information that was given in the show. Then I went away and researched a lot and discovered that approximately 2% of it was verified by history. The rest of it was all nonsense. You know, and I've done that with a few people. I've done that with a few psychics, mediums. They've come out with stuff, and I've gone away and researched it. We've got a big one at the minute in Hull. It's supposed to be an alleyway where a 19th century prostitute called Fanny Adams was murdered. In actual fact, Fanny Adams was a little girl that was murdered 100 and odd mile away in Alton. And at the time, she was carrying sweets, and that's where the term Sweet Fanny Adams comes from. And at that, you know, there was no murder down this alleyway, and there was no prostitute murdered during this period. So I like doing that. I like picking up on these stories and proving or debunking them myself. But yeah, never really seen anything on a TV show I've worked on where I would say it was fraudulent. Quite the opposite. I've been on them where stuff's happened and the crew have crapped themselves. That we did some work when we was filming Monsterland. We were out on Barmston Drain till early hours of the morning, and it got to the point where the crew were literally moving like a military unit because nobody wanted to be left behind. And I mean, I know Barmston Drain's scary anyway. But it was really funny because during the day when you're filming, everyone's kind of spread out, and you know they had a runner was asleep in the van half the time. They had a couple of camera crew and a sound guy and a lighting guy, and you know the presenter and myself and the producer. You're all kind of spread out. You're doing your own thing and getting filmed doing it. And then later on, when the lights went down and sunset, nobody would leave. Nobody would go to the van without going together, and it was really funny.
So when you were in Pontefract, Mike, I mean, it's where I live. I was born just 10 miles from here. Yeah, you did the paranormal lockdown that you did here.
I did. I started off with Most Haunted Live there, and then I did paranormal lockdown.
There's a particular house in Pontefract, isn't there? I forget the name of it. Is it supposed to be a monk that's seen there? I've lost you, Mike. Sorry about that. We lost Mike for a second. Got a few gremlins in the system, but thankfully it's back with us. What I was asking you, Mike, is when you did the paranormal TV shows here in Pontefract, where I live. I like I said, I was born just 10 miles down the road. I think there's a certain house here in Pontefract. I forget the name of it, but does it have a famous sighting or apparition of a monk, something like that? Can you tell us a bit more about that and what happened when you did these TV shows here? I'm just curious from a local point of view.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is known as 30 East Drive. It's been made into a motion picture called When the Lights Go Out. I started researching this a few years ago because, I mean, the property's always fascinated me. Now, the story goes that it's haunted by a black monk known as the Black Monk of Pontefract. And if you listen to certain psychics and this, that, and the other, they reckon that this monk was executed because he was messing about with local children. They claim he was thrown down a well, and the house was built on top of the well. So I was asked to go to Most Haunted Live and then later Paranormal Lockdown and just give the historical overview on that area, the history of the house. I spent ages researching the people that lived there, but I went really far back and looked at what was on the land previously through all the old maps. And what I discovered was actually there wasn't a well on that site. There wasn't even a waterway or a stream or anything like that. And I was quite interested because across the road from where the house is situated, you've got a memorial to the Battle of Chequerfield, which was one of these massive fights in the English Civil War. So I was really interested in that. And then, I basically started researching the Battle of Chequerfield and what went on there. And it was weird because I was sort of saying to these people, there's no such thing as this black monk. There was a number of murders in Pontefract. There was, in 1857, John Speed was poisoned by his wife. There was another one where George Thorpe, 17, was charged with the murder of Elizabeth Mitchell at Upton, near Pontefract. There's lots of stories of murders and stuff like that in the area, but nothing to do with a black monk. And then you'll know yourself that the history of the English Civil War in Ponty, there was a lot of stuff going on at the castle. All Saints Church was hit. Then there was the big battle on March the 1st, 1645. So there was a lot of stuff going on in the area that you could argue is maybe responsible for what's going on at the property. But I couldn't find any evidence of, this supposed monk. People had given me a name of a monk, and there was no records with the monk's name in. And I went right through the history of the property. The council estate itself was built after the Second World War. There was a Waterloo battle monument was actually situated there, known as Cranky Pin, and they demolished that to build the housing estate. So there is stuff going on in the area, but as far as I'm aware, nothing that would explain the sightings of this monk.
Because obviously living in the town, I've heard of it, and I just wondered if there was any, background information to support the monk story. You've obviously said you can't find it. For those that are not aware, I mean, Pontefract is an ancient town. The Romans were here. I think some of them still are on a Saturday night. I really do. And of course, it did play a quite significant part in the English Civil War at the castle. And there's not much of the castle left, but it's still there. So I was just really curious. I mean, when you were doing these lockdowns in Pontefract, aside from the monk, did you actually see anything in the house yourself or experience anything?
The only time I felt weird was going upstairs in the property when we first got there. I just felt sick, but I'd not eaten. I was nervous. I was due to go on live television. I was due to meet, Paul O'Grady and Rylan, and so I think a lot of it was nerves. But there was a strange smell upstairs. This scent seemed to come and go, and we didn't stay in the property that long. But while we were up there, it just felt weird. But then again, I'd watched the movie before I went, so there was a lot of stuff going on in my head. Because I'd been researching it, I knew quite a lot already about all these murders in Pontefract. I'd also known all this stuff about the English Civil War and all, the bloody Battle of Chequerfield. So you could argue that already my head was full of stuff which could have gone towards me feeling that way. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've spoke to hundreds of people through the years that have been there. When people go, they often contact me to tell me what they've seen. I also was able to be put in touch with the family that lived there. One of my friends on Facebook is related to the Pritchard, so she contacted me and she was able to put me in contact with a few people. So I was able to speak to the neighbours and stuff like that and hear what they'd experienced. So yeah, I managed to build up a kind of a chronological timeline of events that have happened in the property throughout the years, from when the Pritchard family started experiencing stuff all the way down to recent years when paranormal groups in and they've seen things and they've heard things. And so, I mean, I find it fascinating. I think the only way they can get to the bottom of that is to close the house off from groups and carry out some sort of investigation without the human element inside the house, see if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, my only experience of the paranormal in Pontefract, for those that are not aware that are listening, the Pontefract has a race course, horse racing. And there used to be, as you come off the M62 motorway on junction 32, literally about half a mile from the junction, there used to be the Parkside Hotel. Right next to
this is a place where a few years ago you used to hold UFO conferences, if I remember correctly.
That's right, Chris. I think we had 2 or 3 there, and I talked to all the bar staff there, as one does when you're socialising, and they told me quite openly that the place was haunted, and not so much seeing ghosts, but like you were saying, Mike, you're being touched and things like that. And even we were there one night, and the girl behind the bar said, "Stop it, so and so." She said, "It just flicked my hair at the side." I didn't see her hair being flicked, but I wasn't looking. So there is that history with it as well. The Parkside, closed and fell into ruin and has now been demolished, so it's no longer there. But I was just curious about is it 30 East Drive and the Mad Monk. Another thing I want to ask you as well, Mike, and this is something that crosses the whole spectrum of what somebody might call paranormal, and I put UFOs into that as well. Is got a lot of people claiming to seeing ghosts and people, or in the UFO field, they see aliens. But yet we don't have any concrete evidence that we can put under the microscope in the way of photographs or film, really. I mean, at Chris's Outer Limits conference last year, not this year, last year, Russell Callahan spoke. You were the opening speaker that day, Mike. And I know one of the things that Russ has mentioned, because one of Russ's jobs is he films Leeds Rhinos rugby team. He's made the statement that as the population now has pretty much access to a phone, and on that phone is some good quality camera equipment that's got better and better as the years have gone by, but the actual images of so-called UFOs and the paranormal have actually got worse. So, is there a piece of film, Mike, that you could recommend to the listeners tonight? Say, have a look at this, because this shows a ghost, not a puff of smoke, not an orb, for God's sake, but a figure that goes through a wall or through a door, a ghost as someone would describe it, or an alien for that matter. Is anything like that?
It's difficult, because a lot of the stuff I see, I get quite skeptical of what I'm watching. There was a post on social media not that long ago, and it was of a girl, and she'd filmed paranormal activity going on in a house. But skeptically speaking, where she was standing, you could have quite easily rigged that up with fishing wire. So I don't think there's any real kind of smoking gun that I could say with 100% proof that, it was sort of paranormal. A lot of the stuff I get sent, I'm always quite skeptical of. I've seen balls of light dancing around properties and stuff like that. The other week I was sent some photographs of a lane in the old part of town, and people had been seeing this ball of light on this lane. And lots of people had photographed this ball of light, and people were sending me these pictures and saying, "Can you debunk it?" And I was on a ghost walk the other night with my company, and I took a group of students out, and they were all taking photographs. And one of them was a media student, and he said to me, "There's a light at the end of the lane, and if you put your hand over the light, it blocks out the ball of light that we're all seeing." And it did. And I was like, wow, yeah, you've just totally explained what all these people are catching, and yet no one's had the foresight to kind of experiment and check it out. And then on the flip side of that, just round the corner was an old church, and I did a charity ghost walk a couple of years back on Halloween, and a gentleman called Jamie took 3 photographs. On one of the photographs, it looked like a man was wearing a top hat, but there was no one around dressed like that. The second photograph looked like a face trying to get through the bars of the chair. And then the third photograph had nothing on. And he sent all 3 photographs to the media, and they published the third one, which had nothing on, and said basically, what can you see? Well, there's nothing on it to see. But then you still get people commenting saying, well, I can see a face, I can see this, I can see that, I can see the other. A few years ago, I did a ghost walk with some friends of mine. One of them's a skeptic. He's a guy called Terry, and he was stood near a building taking photos of us in the group. And at that time, his daughter, who was stood in the group, was taking a photo of him. And when she looked at the photo on her phone, there was a gentleman in a black cowl, a brown cowl, walking behind her dad. And there was no one in the street. And it looked like a monk. And she went over to him and she went, "Dad, look at this." And she sent me the pictures, and to this day we still can't explain who that was walking behind Terry. And he's a skeptic, and she showed him that photo, and he sort of said, "Well, there was no one here, I was on my own." High Street in Hull's quite well lit. Chris will testify to that.
Yes, it is, I agree.
It's a medieval part of town, but there's plenty of lighting down there so that you can see your way around. And the street is in a straight line, so you can see people approaching, and you can hear them. And yet, we've got this photograph that shows very clearly something in a brown cowl walking behind one of the group, and stuff like that. I mean, I've got permission to put it in one of my books, but things like that are few and far between. Most of the time, I get sent pictures of orbs, which you can't rule out dust or water moisture or things like that.
Camera flare.
The big one at the minute is people taking photos of the sun and then saying, well, there's a strange light in the bottom. Well, yeah, it's the glare from the sun. Chris, you work with cameras, so you'll know all about that. And then people taking photos of mirrors and saying, well, there's something in the mirror. But when you say to them, did you polish the mirror? Was the mirror? Oh, well, no, it wasn't. Well, there you go then. It could be a smudge. And people have got to rule this stuff out first before they can come forward and say it's paranormal. The one I'm getting a lot of at the minute is an app that you can download on your mobile phone, so that when you take photographs, you can put the picture of a ghost into your photograph. And I'm getting so many of them, and it's always the same boy and the same girl, you know. And
I believe there's an app you can do that and put a UFO on it as well.
Yeah,
so
there is, Phil. Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
I've actually seen these.
Yeah, because what amazes me, I mean, you know, people claim that, you know, certainly Britain is one of the most watched countries as far as CCTV is. It's here, there, and everywhere. And of course, we all got mobile phones, pretty much all of us. Although I doubt my old flip phone could film anything, you know what I mean. But you know, from a UFO point of view, I couldn't, hand on heart, say to somebody, go and look at this film because it shows an alien. It was captured on CCTV or whatever. You know, my next door neighbour, you know, they've got the whole house rigged, and they can see everything. And it just puzzles me out. Was it? Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. Was it this year that the most haunted TV show actually claimed to have got a full-blown person apparition, whatever you want to call it, caught on camera? I believe it was down the end of a corridor going through a doorway somewhere.
Yeah.
Am I right?
I think actually...
yeah.
Sorry, guys, I was just going to say that I actually saw that on TV myself, Phil, yeah, and it was down a corridor, and this apparition figure was right off in the distance, and it appeared to be going down a set of stairs in the background. Is that the one that you're thinking of?
I think there was a doorway involved somewhere.
The apparition figure was beyond the doorway.
I just wondered if you'd seen it, Mike, what you would think of that, because I heard someone say it looked like one of the cameramen or the crew.
It did, yeah, it did actually. Yeah, I've seen it. It looked like Stuart walking away. The weird thing is, I mean, most of it comes in for a lot of grief from people. I've worked on the show and spent time with the cast while the cameras are not rolling. There are a bunch of really honest people with an interest in the paranormal. And in fact, when you sit down and talk to Yvette and Carl, they will talk about the history of locations and ghosts and where are haunted and you know, they do a lot of research, and people don't see that on screen. They don't see that there's that real passion there, and they want to capture stuff, you know. And I've been there when they've caught stuff on camera and they're reviewing it in front of you, and they're jumping up and down like kids because they're so excited, you know. And I remember there was an experiment they did when we was filming, and a name came through, and Carl came rushing into the room and took me aside, and he said to me, "I've got a bit of paper with a name written on it. Do you know this name?" And he showed me the name, and I confirmed the name was in the history of the building. And he hugged me, he lifted me off my feet, and he was like, yes, and he was so excited. You know, when you see things like that, you think maybe there is something genuine to it. But they do come under fire a lot by people saying, oh, well, it's obviously rigged and hoaxed and this, that, and the other. You know, and them being on set and seeing the excitement, you know, when they've caught something. You know, and the same with the paranormal lockdown guys, you know, when I was chatting with Nick and Katrina, they have a genuine interest in capturing evidence for the people at home, you know, and like I was saying to them, if you were to fake that, if you were to fraudulently, you know, manipulate that, the only people you're fooling are yourselves, really. You know?
Well, what I've thought about most haunted is that they've got to add a degree of, and I'll put this in inverted commas, entertainment. Otherwise, you know, people wouldn't watch it. You know?
Oh, yeah, I mean...
I'm not saying fakery or anything like that. I'm just saying they've got... You know, they are professional TV presenters, so they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've been on investigations with them where there's no cameras. Stuff's happened, and I've been watching like a hawk, and the reactions are totally different than what they are when they're on screen.
Well, I think one of the criticisms, and this is my little bugbear, and I'm sure you're going to give me a good reason for it, is when you watch these various paranormal shows, why are they always filmed at night and in the dark? You know?
Yeah, I think that adds an element of, like you say, the entertainment, you know, because the darkness is so full of shadows. I've conducted experiments during the day. I've had stuff happen during the day. I don't know why people choose to do it at night. I think, like, because there's always that sort of element of what's in that dark corner, what's in that, you know, and things like that, and it adds an element of sort of, it makes you scared and this, that, and the other. I remember I was doing some work with the BBC. The guy I was with was a skeptic, and he was recording me with an old-fashioned, you know, like the big boom mic that you get when you're on location. He was recording with that, and it was massive, you know. we were in this room and he had his headphones on. He had the mic was laid on the floor, and we was getting ready to start recording, and he could hear footsteps, and we were the only people in the building. And he started panicking, and he said, "I can hear footsteps." And he gave me the headset, and I could hear these footsteps, and I gave them back to him. And I that was it then. I was off looking for the source of these footsteps. Was it someone in the building with us? Everything was secure, everything was locked up, and I went back to him, and now he's panicking. And this is a guy who's a total skeptic. And he said to me, the footsteps are getting closer, they're getting louder, and his voice was speeding up, and he was getting more and more scared. And I said to him, I cannot explain them. And then in the end, they just stopped. And to this day, we couldn't. And that was in the middle of the day. It was a beautiful sunny afternoon. The building was well illuminated. We didn't need the lights because the windows were open and airy, and the light was coming in. So stuff does happen during the day. I think for the benefit of the TV shows, they record at night to make it look a little bit scary for the viewer.
I mean, one thing I would like to ask you. I mean, a few years back, I lectured at Muncaster Castle up in the Lake District, and it is known for its hauntings. That's why they did a little paranormal conference there. I was the token UFO researcher. At that time, there was an investigation going on in the castle, and there was a doctor, something or other involved. He was in charge of it. I can't remember his name, to be honest. But what they'd done, they got the whole place, with permission of the owners, of course, wired up.
Yeah.
And he told me, that's why it sprang to my mind when you were telling me that story, is that they had recorded footsteps in one of the rooms when they knew there was nobody in because they'd sealed the place off. And I just wondered, as you as a full-blown paranormal researcher, is there an establishment that you'd like to conduct your own investigation of that type, where the building is sealed? There's no, you're in total charge, and you can wire it up with, audio, video, sensors, whatever. Is there a location like that you'd like to do, Mike?
Oh yeah, we was in a place a couple of weeks ago. It was in a underground cellar system, which has never been open to the public, and it was a big old Victorian.
Can I just interrupt there? Can I just interrupt, because when we were trying to connect with you before we began the show, I said to Chris, he said, "I'm just going to get on a mic now," and I said, "He'll be in a cellar somewhere." So sorry, mate, just carry on.
Yeah, magnificent big Victorian cellar, and it's never been investigated before. And we got chatting about stuff, and my friend was with me, and he said to me, "You know what?" He said, "It'd be great to get skeptics in here, and not give them the whole it's haunted thing. Just get a group of skeptics in. Then the next night, get a group of believers in. Then the next night, get a group of investigators in, and just see what results we get from each one." And the thing is with the paranormal world is when you go to these places, the posters will say, as seen on this show, this is what's happened here, and they will give you the spiel before you even go there. And what I would rather do is just have people come along to a venue with an open mind, and we're just saying, basically, you're going to go in the cellar of a warehouse. We want to know what you think. And that's it. And I'd like to do something along those lines, and then compare the results at the end of the week and see who experienced what. See whether the believers actually experienced anything, and see whether the skeptics could explain away what the believer, and that sort of thing. That's always fascinated me. If you take different groups in, I did a night once, and a lady had come from a well-known shopping centre, and she said to me, "All this paranormal stuff is rubbish." And we was in the venue, and after about 5 minutes, she was screaming. She was in hysterics. She wanted to be taken home. She wanted me to get her a taxi. And I took her outside and asked her what she'd seen. And she'd seen a dark, shadowy figure running across the back wall of the premises. Now, I said to her, "Look, we need to go up and debunk this. We need to go and investigate. You need to face your fears and come back with me." And we went up there, and we had a look in the room. And while we were stood there, she saw it again. She freaked out. And I grabbed her and said, "Look, wait, let's see if we can both see it." And the next time, there was two figures running along the wall. And I pointed out to her that when cars passed by outside, the headlights were flashing through the windows, shining on our backs, so that to us at the wall, our shadows were moving. And in the darkness, of course, that looks like it's a dark figure moving across the wall. And after that, she was giggling. She said, "I can't believe I'm frightening me in shadow." And I said, "But that's the whole point."
If we assume that,
Sorry?
if we assume that, hauntings, stroke the paranormal are real, or that there are some genuine phenomena here, Mike, I'm quite skeptical myself, but I have witnessed the paranormal firsthand. So what lies behind it all, Mike? What is it? We'd ask the same of a UFO researcher. What lies behind the UFO phenomenon? What's your opinion? What's your take on this? If you've seen these things, you've experienced them. Well, what are they? What is it?
Well, I mean, all I can think of is, in life, when we die, the energy that we have. It's weird because a lot of the venues that I research, I'll actually go through the history and find evidence of, deaths at the properties and things like that. But a lot of properties that I've been called into, we've had psychics going that have made up the history. So you already have a preconceived notion that you're going to see a monk or you're going to see children and this, that, and the other. So people will go along already with ideas of what they will see. And when stuff happens, that just reaffirms their belief for them. And I like to experiment. I like to go to places where nobody really knows anything about it. I remember once I went to a castle in Scotland that was haunted. And the story was that this guy was walking through a forest. He'd gone up to the castle and the ghost of some sort of ancient landowner had come towards him and he was brandishing a sword. And he attacked this man and cut his inside. And for years, that had been passed around as a true ghost story. And I said, well, who told the story? If the man's dead and he's had his insides pulled out, who was it who told the ghost story? How do you know he saw? I've been in places where I've seen psychics read up on the history before the investigation, and then they will come out with all the right names. And at the same time, I've been to places with certain psychics that have just come up on the same information at different venues, leading me to believe that maybe there's something psychological going on there, where the voices that they're hearing are not paranormal, but perhaps, in their own head. There was a female that I was working with, and we went to 4 different venues, and she picked up on a young boy, an angry man, and a ghostly monk at every single venue, in that order. And that to me would indicate that maybe she's hearing those voices and they're not actually spiritual. But yeah, I mean, I found it fascinating. For me, that the whole buzz is going out to these venues and stuff. And I go during the day, I go during the night. I'm often out and about somewhere, getting up to mischief in some location. And I just find it fascinating. And for me, it stopped being frightening a long time ago. But I get people come with me that are so scared, and people contact me because they are scared about this sort of thing, and I'll put them in touch with, priests and all sorts to try and get them closure. But in the meantime, it's the whole adventure side of it I found absolutely fascinating. Years and years and years ago, when I first started out, it must have been about the first year I was researching, that I was actively doing paranormal investigations. I was at Hull New Theatre, and I was sat on my own in Royal Box B, and I heard footsteps. There was no one there. I heard scratching on the door. I opened the door. There was no one there. One of the chairs moved in the box. There was no one in there apart from me. And then I felt like someone had blown on my neck. And at that point, I was terrified because there was a physical interaction there. Something blew on my neck. Eventually the group came and they got me from the box, and we went downstairs, and I went into the little boys' room. And I was stood at the urinal, and the guy next to me who was filming said to me, "Look, you've got something on your neck." And we looked in the mirror, and I had 3 big scratch marks on my neck. And that put me off visiting Hull New Theatre for a year. I wouldn't go back. And eventually when I did, the first thing I did, I said, "Look, I want to go in the box. Can you leave me alone in the box for an hour?" And I went and sat there, and nothing happened, and I got over that. But yeah, that really terrified me because there was a physical interaction. I don't know what it is. I can't explain what it is, but that was weird. I mean, the weird thing about that as well is the guy who ran the guy who used to let us in back then, he actually turned around to us at the end of the night and said, "Oh, well, someone had been messing about with a Ouija board in there the week before." But yeah, I mean, that was really weird. And to this day, I still cannot explain it. That's the only instance where something has physically touched me in a threatening manner. We was at Fort Paul earlier this year. We was in the hospital, and I'd gone down into one of the rooms on my own. And as I was leaving that room, to make sure that no one had left any belongings behind, it was middle of the night. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I felt someone smack me on my ass. Someone physically broke my bum. and that freaked me out. But not, I just sort of laughed and said, like, you know, it's obviously not the best way of putting the willies up someone. And it just made me laugh, and it was really funny because there were stories about one of the gentlemen who worked for the army going back into the 1700s. He was a closet homosexual, and he used to touch the young boys that went down there for medical treatment. So here I am getting all this equipment, and I'm walking out the room, and pitch black, and something smacks me on my bottom. So that made me walk a little bit quicker. But yeah, so there have been some interesting ones that are quite. I remember going to a house blessing in Sutton. Before we went in, someone said to me, "Would you like to do a prayer of protection?" I'm an atheist, so I just said, "What use is that going to do me, really? Like, as an atheist?" And I walked into the building, and the family were dead set in front of us, but from the right hand side, a frying pan flew across the room, and this with all the lights on as well, so you can see where everyone stood. And it narrowly missed my head by about an inch. And I stepped backwards out of the room and said to the guy, "Can you pray for me?" But yeah, that was weird, and that was quite an interesting case, because it was an old farmhouse and they'd been having weird stuff going on, and they called us in, and that was freaky. You know, I took a friend with me who's heavily involved with the spiritualism movement, and you know, and it was a really good night, and we ended up getting whatever it was in there went. And the family contacted and said, you know, it's a wonderful feeling. It's really nice now that you've done that. So that was interesting.
Okay, now we've got about 6 minutes left, and I mean, is there anything you want to ask Phil? Anything else?
Well, not really. I mean, you mentioned I don't think we've got time to cover it now, but UFO-wise, Mike, you know, in the short time we've got left, what do you think lies behind the UFO phenomena?
Ooh, interesting one. I don't know. I still think our government are doing a lot that we don't know. And I say that because I spend a lot of time scrabbling around East Yorkshire, looking at former bunkers and stuff like that. So I do know that there is a hidden truth. You know, in that respect, there's a lot of Cold War relics still hidden around East Yorkshire that have not been open to the public. So if they're hiding that, what else are they adding, you know? So I do believe that they know something. Do I think it's extraterrestrial? I don't know about that. I'm not sure if they're aliens, but I do believe there's craft in our sky that we cannot control. I certainly believe that. I watch a lot of the TV shows and stuff like that, and I've seen quite a lot of interesting bits of footage. I remember years ago watching the STS footage back in the 90s, and that used to fascinate me. But yeah, I don't know. I honestly do not know, and I just find it fascinating. You know, I mean, I've been following the UFO stuff for years now. I remember going to a lecture with Timothy Good, and at the end of the night, he said, "If anyone wants me to sign my new book," and I literally turned up with a backpack full of his old books and his new book, and got him to sign a lot. I love going to all the conferences and stuff and meeting people, and for years I've kind of flown under the radar. It's only in sort of the last 2 or 3 years that it's become quite well known and what I'm doing and things like that. But I just love research, and I love meeting new people, you know. I mean, I grew up reading Phillips articles and seeing him in UFO magazine all the time, and so I grew up with that sort of stuff. So getting to meet you at the conference,
you know, there's always somebody comes on this radio makes me sound really old.
Well, what it is, Phil, it's actually because, as we've mentioned before, you are UFO royalty.
Somebody called me that recently. No.
I don't know.
That's funny.
Well, I do hope,
I've been
Mike.
called all kinds of things, mate, but never that before.
I do hope, Mike, that you're actually going to come to Pontefract next year and get your what could possibly be your one and only chance to meet Calvin Parker for the Pascagoula incident. And believe me, there is some fascinating information going to come out about this, because I do know that Phillips and well, he's just found out some more information, which we're going to bring out at a later date, I should think. But what I want to do now, Mike, because we've got about 3 minutes left, so I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm ever so sorry about the little technical gremlin that we had a little bit earlier on, but hopefully it's not spoiled anybody's enjoyment of the programme this evening. And on behalf of myself, I'd like to say thank you very much. I'm sure Philip would like to.
Yeah, I would, Mike, and I'd like to say all power to your pen, mate. I hope Mike Covell Investigates goes on for a lot more years. I really do. You know, you're a credit, Mike, and thank you for this evening.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So then, Phil, what did you think of that then, speaking with Mike?
Well, fascinating, Chris. I mean, one of the reasons I was a bit quiet, sort of throughout the beginning part, or the first half anyway, is that I don't know the gentleman that well. So I was interested in to listen to what Mike had to say. I've met him before and we've corresponded on email, but nothing really in depth. And I saw his presentation at last year's Outer Limits magazine conference. So I was just interested in hearing more. And it shows you what one person can do if they've got that interest, that drive and that passion. I mean, no one's made Mike do what he's done, and I think he's a great credit to himself. I really do.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. As Mike mentioned during the interview, we first met up around about 20 or so years ago now. When he came across to the Hull UFO Society, when I was running that, and he's fascinated me from day one, to be quite honest with you. And he really can talk, and he really does know his subject, which reminds me, we've got another conference coming up next year, haven't we?
Well, exactly. I mean, at your request, we've moved it from Hull, and it's going to be in my town where I live this time, in Pontefract. And I think we've got a real... not that no disrespect to the other lineups, but I think they're different every year, Chris, and just get about as fascinating as you can get without being big-headed or anything like that. And I think we've got, no matter what your interest is in the UFO field, my view is that the past two conferences you've put on and the one that's coming up next year, there's something there for everyone. There really is.
Absolutely, I completely agree. We have to do something different, I think, every year. If we do them every year, that is, if we carry on doing them in the future. And this year's lineup, as you say, is absolutely fantastic. And again, we've got an American coming in.
Well, we have. I mean, it's something I'm looking forward to myself as well. We've got Calvin Parker from Mississippi. It's Calvin's first trip to the UK as well, Chris, and it's probably his last one, and I can't wait.
Well, this is a good reason, isn't it, for people, let's make him welcome, because my understanding is he's actually turned down a trip to MUFON, Ohio on the same date as the Outer Limits magazine conference. He's actually coming to the UK and turning down the trip to MUFON in Ohio just to come and see us all over here in the UK.
That is true. And I mean, if you look at the difference, I'm not talking about the crowd or anything like that, just in the travel alone. I mean, to go to Ohio is a relatively short trip on an aircraft, whereas to come to Pontefract, it's got to be, a full day's travelling. And a change in the time zone. I mean, he's 6 hours behind us, so he'll have jet lag as well.
Yeah.
But, we did give him the option, and we wouldn't have blamed him if he'd have picked Ohio, but he said, no, I've made a commitment to come to Pontefract. I'm a man of my word, which he is, and he's coming. And there's nothing will stop him as far as I can tell anyway.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. So... how is the book going, Phil? His story, how is that going?
Well, for those that are not aware, I mean, I published, or republished, I should say, Charles Hickson and William Mendez book, which originally came out in 1983. And I obtained the rights to it and republished it. Now, when I was in the process of that, I knew that Charles Hickson had died in 2011. And I thought it'd be nice just to round the book off maybe with an interview with Calvin. So I set out to try and find him. It took me a few months, but in the end, when I did, lo and behold, he just decided, him and his wife, to do his own book. So, the stars aligned in that respect. Mm-hmm. So I helped him produce the book, and it's done, exceptionally well. It became an Amazon bestseller. It's out in Kindle. It's out as an audio book. It's coming out in Japanese, and Spanish, and German. And I'm talking to other countries as well. So it's gone far better than any of us ever expected. But, that's just the way it goes. And, Calvin's over the moon with it. And that's all that matters, really. That's the most important thing, is that he's happy with what we've produced.
Absolutely. Doesn't this just show, though, that despite what some people say, that there is no interest anymore for this subject, the fact that it's gone out into all of those countries, and you're still talking to other countries' publishers, that there is still an interest and a quest for knowledge within this field.
Absolutely. And I mean, Calvin did another TV show yesterday that's coming out in January. He's done a couple of interviews already. There are other TV production companies, looking for his services. He's never really lectured at UFO conferences before, but I think he's got now, including the one in Pontefract, I think he's got 6 on his list.
Excellent.
Quite literally today he turned one down because he already has something booked, and that was for November of next year. Yeah. And he's looking forward to it, Chris.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, not that we just want to concentrate on Calvin, we certainly don't. Let's just mention who else we've got, because we've got about 3 minutes left of the programme. So, Malcolm Robinson, he's going to be talking about, is it the Deckman Law, the Bob Taylor incident there?
That's right, at Livingston. I mean, I was fortunate that some years ago to travel up to Scotland and to interview Robert Taylor. And, a more honest man you could never wish to meet, Chris. And, what Malcolm's done is put everything into the book, about not only about the case, but all the theories behind it as well. There's lots of different theories trying to explain it.
So this is certainly going to be then a subject that people, if they have an interest in anything famous, any famous British ufological case, that they really need to get to the Outer Limits Magazine conference next year to listen to this.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard Malcolm speak about this incident before, and it never ceases to amaze me what he comes up with.
Absolutely. And of course, we have Philip Kinsella. He's coming along as well. I'm not 100% certain what Philip's going to be talking about at the moment, unless he's actually mentioned it to you. But I do know it's going to be focused on the topic of the conference, which is the closest of encounters. So that is all I can tell you right now, folks.
Well, all I know is that Philip's had his own encounters. Yeah. So I think that's going to be a big part of what he talks about. And we've covered that on Inside Outer Limits before.
We certainly did.
But he'll be able to go into more detail, and you'll be able to speak to the man himself and put a few questions to him as well.
Oh, well, that's brilliant. And, of course, we've got a gentleman who's returning for the 3rd time in 3 conferences, Paul Sinclair. He's going to be discussing a lot more incidents going on in the Bridlington area, and again, he's a guy, he's a man who fascinates, and he has you can see the love that he has for the subject by how he presents it.
Well, Paul's a man on a mission, isn't he? He's out in the field, literally out in the field at the crack of dawn, in all weathers, because whatever the phenomena is, it is manifesting itself in the region where he lives. And Paul's determined to get, to the bottom of it. I've seen both these presentations previously, and the story and the saga surrounding where he lives just continues. And again, as a UFO researcher, I personally can't wait to hear not just Paul, but all of them. I don't think we could have picked a better lineup.
I think this is going to be a very, very special event, and to be quite honest with you, Phil, I think people need to start getting the tickets, because once we get into the new year, I can see this is going to fill up very, very quickly. As we say, especially with Calvin coming over for what could be a one and only, once in a lifetime event, to put it bluntly.
I agree with you, Chris, and I reckon that this next year's conference will be one of those conferences that people still talk about in years to come, and look back on it and say, can you remember when we were in Pontefract and they showed us this and they showed us that, and so there you go.
That's brilliant. Well, just before we join Irene and Mark on the Paranormal Radio UK radio show, we're actually going to say goodbye to everybody. And just before we do, just a quick reminder, who we got next, Phil, coming up? Isn't it the man himself?
It is. We've booked Calvin Parker for a 2-hour interview. And, I say interview. Calvin's a great storyteller and a raconteur, so basically just ask him his name, Chris, and then sit back and go and watch the telly for a couple of hours and leave him to it. You know, there'll be no stopping him, I can assure you. But he is a fascinating individual in himself.
He's had a fascinating life as well, hasn't he?
He has indeed.
He has indeed. Right, Phil, thanks very much again for being my co-host on the show, and I'll speak to you very soon. Take care.
Bye-bye now.